We're back to the Neil Haley Show, and I always get excited about topics, and my guest is an inclusion visionary. And I could think of inclusion in so many different ways. I think of inclusive environments when you talk about special education and the process of kids and how they're in the least restrictive environment. That's where I hear the word inclusion, but I've never heard of an inclusion visionary. So I'm excited to welcome to the program Julia Geisman. Julia, thanks for stopping by. And you can kind of explain to me, what does that mean?
Well, Neil, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. So I've been thinking about what is it that would separate me from everybody else in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. And the fact of the matter is that I have been for 8 to 10 years talking about being able to measure inclusion. And it comes from a place of believing that inclusion is the DNI of organizations as well as society. It permeates everything. It's about a mindset. So when I talk about being a visionary, an inclusion visionary, what I'm really talking about is I was ahead of the pack here. You know, that people would talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but all the metrics were around headcount or salary audits.
Okay.
And they would also talk about inclusion within the context of employee engagement surveys.
Okay.
But they never went deep and understood, and they still don't understand, that inclusion is in the eye of the beholder.
Yes.
It's based upon employee perception of the environment, as opposed to an individual experience. It's the perception of the whole. Does that make sense? Are you tracking with me?
Yeah, no, it's the perception of the whole. So kind of take me deeper into this process. Who do you work with as an inclusion visionary?
Okay, so we work, thanks to the question, that's a great question. We work specifically with corporations in taking a look at their culture, their workplace systems, their policies, their procedures, and we use an online assessment in order to get data, specific objectionable data in all levels of the organization, including the executive suite. So we're able to compare apples to apples vis-a-vis the culture, the overall work environment to support people's success in doing the job that they have to do, in advancement opportunities and development opportunities. But the other thing that we find or we investigate is the personal beliefs that individuals have regarding the importance of inclusive work environment, and then the reality of the work environment in which they happen to be living.
So what's the mistake that many companies do when it comes to inclusion?
They don't measure it in a meaningful way. They don't have quantifiable data. They think that, oh, the engagement survey is enough, but it's not.
Wow.
I'm here to tell you it is not enough because it's not a deep enough dive. An engagement survey is around what, of the entire organization. So when we look at inclusion through the eyes of the employee, we look to see if what everybody is seeing.
Okay.
In other words, what are the executives seeing?
Exactly.
What are the people in the C-suite?
Yeah, and so really they just say, I checked the box, but I really didn't do anything. And you went and interviewed that person, but you never hired them. You went you gave them an opportunity, but yet you didn't provide the environment that they could thrive in. And
exactly.
Stay with the company. They saw that there was not the diversity that was out there. There was not that environment. So they looked to leave to go find one somewhere where you work with. So what kind of organizations have you worked with so far in doing this?
Well, let me go back to what you just said about diversity. People, when I talk about head counts, it's about the number of people that look diverse or think in a diverse manner or who are physically diverse. But it's not about retaining them. Inclusion is about the success of an organization to attract and retain talent.
Yes.
Just because you have somebody that looks different from you, it does not mean that they're going to stay.
They're not going to stay. So that's where you look at the numbers and the numbers not in the head count, the numbers in again
Perception. In
Yeah.
perception, so that organizations have data that they
Yeah.
can map out a strategy that is effective and efficient, and they have a baseline now against which to monitor progress.
Without naming companies, what size companies have you worked with?
It really depends. We started off with working with larger organizations between 1,000 and 5,000, but in thinking about it, inclusion is such a critical topic that every company, regardless of their size, really needs to have a beat, a pulse on where they stand vis-a-vis inclusion.
And is it more difficult
Even
now?
startups, interestingly enough,
Sorry.
Neil, startups, they start, I mean, all they're focused on is making